My name is Charles Brower. My father was David K. Brower, Kapkan. My mother was Marie Ikelian Sigavan Brower, originally from Wainwright. My father was born in Barrow. I was born in Barrow, and my grandparents were, on my mother's side, were Stephen and Ruth Sigavan, and my grandfather and my grandmother on my father's side were Charles D. Brower, whom I'm named after, and Asiangatak, originally from Sishmaraf. I think the early movie stereotypes that people see, people living in igloos, although the word, my language, igloo means house, period, not just a dome made out of ice and snow. That's one stereotype that I ran across. And that most of my meals were raw fish or raw meat, frozen. And they wondered, how could I survive in a place like Los Angeles without raw stuff? And it's really not true. A lot of our food was cooked over open fire. Had to overcome some of that stereotype. There was the language. They could not understand how the word for my people and the word for the language were the same. Yeah, English and English, similar thing. Iñupiaq means the people. Iñupiaq is also our language. In a singular term, Iñupiat means the more than one, the plural of Iñupiaq. Iñupiaq means one, but it also means the people itself. And having those kinds of stereotypes, as well as nobody had ever heard of Iñupiaq. People have heard of Eskimos. And that was, how can you be an Iñupiaq if you're an Eskimo? How can you be white if you're Caucasian? If you're similar situations. So there were some of those stereotypes that were a little different too. I smile at them quite often because obviously it's a very limited knowledge of who we are and where we come from. And if somebody has given them a wrong stereotype, that's what they're going to carry. Back when Dave Beckett was our superintendent, I had volunteered to mow the lawn, do ground maintenance at our church, St. John United Methodist Church in Anchorage. And part of that was also interacting with the DS and what I did, and he understood very quickly that I was Native Alaskan, and that the church needed some interaction with more Native people. At about that time, Reverend Jim Campbell, who was the pastor at the Turnagain Methodist Church, and before that at the Willow Church, had started a group of Native people, elders. They called it Giving Voice. It was to be a gathering where elders, Native elders from all across the whole state of Alaska, could sit and have conversations about and compare some of the difficulties they were experiencing. Things like communicating with grandchildren, trying to understand what it is that the kids do when they're doing their thumb movements with their phones. What LOL or some of those other things that we use today, laugh out loud, some of them thought it was lots of love. But trying to understand what it is that the kids today who don't know our language primarily, for whatever reason, were doing. But then that morphed after 3 years into a gathering of Native pastors with similar experiences of being out in bush Alaska and rural Alaska, of people who had been left behind by the missionaries, because the missionaries left, what, 75 years or so ago. It's very expensive here in Alaska. And to bring the message of Jesus Christ, the good news, to those people who were hungry to hear about it, but had really no training or any training to lead Bible study or have conversations about what it meant to be a Christian and what it meant for them to know about Jesus Christ. Most of their church was from televangelists on TV on Sunday morning before NFL football games. But after that morphed, and I was kind of the moderator of this group of Native pastors, but we had conversations about what is our role in bringing opportunity for young folks to consider going to ministry or leading Bible study even. And so we had several conversations, probably about 12 years worth of conversations once or twice a year, And the Methodist Church picked up the tab for all that, the travel, the lodging, and also putting together a program that seemed appropriate at the time. And during that process, here I was just a layperson, member of St. John United Methodist Church. And in order for me to be able to communicate with young folks who may want to go in the ministry, I decided, well, maybe I ought to get some training into what it is to be a lay pastor, certified lay minister. So I took some courses in the different denominations, lay pastor programs, just so I could be a resource for some of the younger folks who might have questions. What does it mean to be a pastor? But at the end of that whole process, there I was with all this training and no young person coming forward expressing an interest in how do I become a pastor. And then the pastors at Nome's Community United Methodist Church planned to leave. And our superintendent called me and he said, Charlie, how would you like to put some of that to work? And so we had a conversation at his house, made a phone call to the folks in Nome, the SBRC in Nome, and just a calm came over me. Yeah, you got to go, Charlie. So that's how I became a pastor 4 years ago, going on 5. And I originally signed down here for a 2-year interim, a 2-year interim while United Methodist Church here in Alaska, the conference, was looking for a different solution. But it's been 4 years going on 5. I'm now 71 years old, still enjoying it. And I guess I'll stay here as long as the people want me to stay. I'm pastoring in Nome, a community that's a crossroads of several different Alaska Native cultures. North of us are the Iñupiaq, of which I'm a member. South of us are the Yupik, Central Yupik people. And then just offshore, a couple hundred miles, are the Siberian Yupik, who come from the Russian side. But amongst all those people, there have been a number of missionaries from way back in the 1800s who come to share the good news of Jesus Christ. They have not always done it the good way, the way we should be doing it, where we respect the culture. Some of the things that have happened at some of the communities, like Barrow, where I grew up, in Utqiagvik now, there is a great divide in the older folks and the younger folks. The younger folks want to bring back the Eskimo dancing in celebration. But when somebody dies, or on a Sunday evening, when church services should be going on, or Wednesday evening when church services should be going on, the older folks say we shouldn't be dancing on those days, or in celebration of, even if somebody really loved to dance, we should not be celebrating with dances, because that's what the missionaries took away from us. Said that was bad. So there's a kind of a cultural divide, age-wise. The older folks want to keep the holy days holy, as you will. And the younger folks says, why couldn't we include what we enjoy? What was there for us? Dancing being just one of those. The other things, the Angatkuls, what people call shaman, our word for them, Angatkul. I guess they were probably the people who did some miraculous things that we heard about. They were medicine men. They were our spiritual leaders. But when the missionaries came, the missionaries said that their practice is bad. And they were really our connection spiritually with what was above the heavens, a creator. And that place down below, a place we call Tammavik, place to get lost. They were kind of the connection between those worlds and our world where we live. And the missionaries saw that was bad, that this competition for them. So those folks are gone away now. But you still see a few people with traditional medicine who also would have, back in those days, probably would have expanded their traditional medicine work into spiritual work of the people. And that's gone away. How much better would we be with more traditional medicines? Someone who interprets, particularly now that the missionaries are gone, somebody to lead our spiritual life. Probably even including the work of the missionaries and maybe replacing some of the pagan ideas they might have had to replace them with Jesus Christ and the good news. That's probably a good possibility. Here in Nome, I love what the people from King Island do. They still hold on to the dance. Just recently we had a burial. As part of that ceremony of putting somebody away, we had the service in the church. We did the burial at the cemetery. Then afterwards we had a feast, a potluck. And after that, we had a big Eskimo dance celebrating the culture. Those things are gone. But there's hope. I think the church is coming around to understanding that there is more than just the way it used to be for Christian work to happen. We still need to take care of people, whether it be with Angat so long ago, the traditional healers of today, and church. And some of the people in some of our communities are starting to understand that the way that the white man's way, what we call today, has not always worked. We still spend millions of dollars on trying to take care of people who've got addictions, alcohol, drugs, who are working that problem out, and without the leadership of people with spiritual background, it's very difficult. We keep throwing money after dollars after dollars, and it's not working. And it's been that way for the last 25, 30 years. Now we're starting to think maybe we'll bring some spiritual people into the picture. Maybe they have something. The work that Bertha Kawiluk does with Beauty from Ashes, bringing the spiritual part into the picture, it's got great hope. Many Alaskan communities were decimated way back, but not just by the work of the missionaries, but also by a lot of sicknesses, illnesses, some epidemics that came through here back in the late 1700s, 1800s. And we're still struggling with the loss of great numbers of our people. The things that we're doing today, like the situation in 2012 of the Act of Repentance from the Methodist Church, people are still wondering, what is it that the church has done? They don't have enough of the correct history of how the impacts were of some of the things that church did. Big emphasis on things like John Shillington and the Sand Creek Massacre. But a lot of the things that the church has been involved in, and primarily government, complicit in doing away with many cultures, and the result of boarding schools. I will be stopping in Anchorage in September to go to a conference on how do we deal with those people who are looking for a way of helping one another with their boarding school experience. And then after that, I was taken to Los Angeles and eventually New York City as a relocation program, away from my people. During my high school years, during my time away from home and relocation program, I never really got a chance to know the culture that I was born into. But today I am proud to be able to say I've gone whaling. I'm accepted as a hunting partner. I'm accepted into the community as an elder. Some of those things that we natives particularly enjoy, mainly because we have to hunt off this land, pick the berries, whale, seals, all those things that are part of our diet, part of our lifestyle, are things that many people outside of Alaska do not understand. People in church, they take something away, they don't replace it with something positive. What do? We have many Native Americans across the country that don't know their culture. I am lucky to be one of those who have integrated back in. And as often as I turned away from what God wanted me to do, I wasn't listening well. He's kept me in His in his hold. He's kept me there. He's kept me safe. He has plans for me. And a lot of people in the Methodist Church, particularly with our act of repentance, still don't understand what it means when somebody says we're sorry. But they don't know what they're sorry for. And they ask a lot of questions of us. What did we do wrong? There was a family camp last month in Oklahoma. One of my friends from way back that I've known since we were both boarding school, 7th and 8th grade. He was in 5th and 6th grade. He'd been in boarding school since he was 6 years old. I was in boarding school since I was 10. But he's been a professor at the University of Alaska Anchorage on Native Studies. And he led a discussion during that family camp about historic trauma, including the epidemics, the result of the missionaries, and of the boarding schools. And his comment to one of the people who were there was, where did you go? Somebody who was not Native. He asked them, where did you go wrong? And they did not know. They had no answer. They don't know enough of the history of where boarding schools were. They don't have enough of the history of the cultural genocide from becoming Christian, say, Christian. It's, if you don't understand, it's difficult to say you're sorry for something you don't know anything about. And so many people who are going through the situation of act of repentance are still asking us, what can we do? And if they don't do enough correct research or enough research to try to understand what it is that we've gone through, it just gets to be on the surface, nothing really deep. And we who are on the Native American side kind of wonder, do they really mean it? Is it from the heart? If they don't want to go through the process of learning on their own and really dig into the history, it's difficult for us to share what it means. The depth is not there. The process of reconciliation is ages long. It's several generations long. Today in our church we have a young woman whose mother was a boarding school person. She was raised by her grandmother. She never really got to know her mother because her mother was away in boarding schools and whatever afterwards. And her grandmother wanted her never to speak in Yupik. She said, well, living here in Nome, dominant culture was in charge and still is kind of in some ways. But she was encouraged to take secretarial courses. That was the way to better her grandmother thought this was a good way for her to better herself, get a job. But then she never really understood the divide of why her mother was not there, why her grandmother raised her, and why her grandmother had these feelings of inadequacy when it comes to the dominant culture. Why must I do the menial job, secretary? And so it's generations long. And she's still wondering today of what was it that could have changed. Nobody knows. And then we have another person here in town that I always wondered, when I asked my parents about their experiences in boarding school, they would shut up. It was taboo. They didn't want to relive those experiences. So there was also that divide of not knowing the history, even within the family, of what some of the traumas that families go through. And part of the process of understanding what causes us to act the way we do, some of us, inappropriately, we have to understand what's there driving us. Historic trauma is one of those drivers. If you don't live in your culture, you never learn the culture you were born into, you're not accepted by the culture you live in, where are you? You're lost out there somewhere, and you don't know how to react. So the easiest way for many of these folks that suffered this, and it goes on to the next generation, the generation after that, is to find peace in the bottle, inappropriate behaviors. And it continues generation after generation. Alcohol is a big part of that. Drugs and alcohol. Just to numb yourself to what you face daily. Not acceptance by your culture, not acceptance by the dominant culture. You're somewhere in the middle, and you really have no place that you can call a comfort zone. And it's one of the reasons we have such high rates of alcoholism, high rates of suicide, and it's people still not knowing why. And how can we start to heal? How can we have conversations so we can heal ourselves, understand what it is we need to heal, and that we are in control of some things and maybe sometimes not. But it's a long, long process. In my culture, the Inupiaq culture, there are some parts of our lives that are men only, women only, and that's kind of reflected in some of the words that we have. I was asked recently to be part of a instruction for the high school kids here in Nome on Inupiaq languages, and the other instructor, who was a woman, asked me about some words, and I told her I had never heard that word, mainly because it dealt with cooking and the things that are traditionally women's work. And then I used some words that I used when we were out hunting that she had never heard. So there's kind of a divide even in the usage of words, of things that men are traditionally used to doing, women are traditionally used to doing, and somewhere in the middle there's opportunity for conversation, but obviously it had not happened that way. So having said that, we still have that situation, the divide of what happens in the women's world, the men's world, and how we treat one another. There's still the divide, there's still an interest of the opposite sex. But we're still somewhat reluctant to face the issue of the differences, and I would go back to the issue of historic trauma from the cultures. When you don't know enough about what the other side is doing, you're very suspicious of how things happen or what happens, the taboos that might be there for whatever reason, why women do certain things the way they do, and men don't always understand them. And occasionally they get to the point where they will lash out if they don't understand, and that can lead to domestic violence. And when you are in a state of inebriation because you're enjoying your evening, because you don't know what else to do, because you don't either fit in the Inupiaq culture or the dominant culture, you're already in a situation where things are easy to do that easily come out of control, get out of control. And not knowing how much impact you're having can lead to, in a lot of cases, domestic violence. And that's something that we have a hard time understanding. Even within church, as often as I can say, love God, love one another, love your neighbor. Everyone's your neighbor. But that message still gets lost somewhere along the line when we don't understand who we are and how we should be acting correctly. A lot of that has disappeared. The men taught the young men, normally by a young man by an uncle or a close relative, probably not by the father. And the women were a similar way. The women were taught by the aunts, uncles, cousins, in close bonds. But those structures have disappeared. The school system is set to where you're competing for the few A's and the few B's that are available, where in the native culture, everybody works on a problem together, not two or three here, not two or three there, but everybody in a whole, working on a problem, the problem of communication, the problem of sharing food, making sure everybody has enough food to live. A lot of it is done by community. A lot of that is being lost today, mainly because we're in a competitive world. The few A's in school, the few B's in school, the raises that are given by the different companies, few jobs. The poverty rate here in Nome is, I understand, some 34%. It's high. And we don't always have an understanding that if we share, there's a better chance for all of us to survive. It's always me first. And that's the culture we have been exposed to, and that's the dominant culture today, so we're living in that. It's no longer, let me take care of these poor folks. That's the church's job. But who is the church? If we don't belong to the church and understand that we are the church, how can we take care of those folks if we don't understand that they are our brothers? That if we don't take care of them, we can't rely on the government to do it, because it's too big a job for the government. The government is druddy with all the different programs they have for welfare. It's not working. So it's really up to us here to take care of those close by us. And that concept has been lost. There are some things that we share, the historic trauma from the relocation programs, in their situation, Trail of Tears, and relocation to reservations away from their home countries where they grew up, where their cultures originally were. We don't have so much of that here in Alaska, but we have had the boarding schools. I know people who, from my hometown, went boarding schools in Salem, Oregon, in Chilocco, Oklahoma. I was probably one of the more fortunate ones. I only went 1,000 miles away to Wrangell or Sitka, Alaska, but still away from home many months of the year. The differences are more so pronounced in the reservation systems. And the reservations, we have 2 small reservations here in the state of Alaska. But the gaming programs that fund a lot of the programs that the Native Americans have on the reservations are money generators. And we don't have that here in Alaska. It's different. So, but we have the corporations, and they're doing very well, many of them. But the differences are that we don't have the history of being relocated many miles away to a foreign place. We are still in our land. But the situation is such that we're able to hunt off that land a good part of the year, where the reservation Indians pretty much have to rely on going to the store, or because they no longer can hunt or don't hunt the bounty that used to be where they were at. The buffalo are mostly gone. Some of the reindeer and fishing are highly regulated. Columbia River, you can only fish so much time. Even that situation is happening here in Alaska. They shut down the king salmon fishing down in southeast Alaska, all of it, just last week. So there's still that sense that for the better of somebody, I'm not sure who that somebody is or where they are, for the betterment of those people, we are restricted from doing the things we used to do to fulfill our lifestyle being living. If I don't have fish to eat, what am I going to eat? I cannot afford $12 a pound steak from the store because I don't have that kind of money to spend. The foods that we used to be able to just take off the land, not great abundance, but enough to feed our families, that opportunity is not here. It's regulated. Sports hunters come and get the trophies. Many people here do it for food and share. And I like that, because there are some non-native folks here that will drop off king crab, fish, muskox, moose meat, and share. And I like that. They've learned some of our traditions. But the subsistence lifestyle is probably more germane to here in Alaska than it is anywhere else. The reservations are on the end of a road system somewhere. We don't have the road systems here in Alaska. But those folks who live in bush Alaska have taken to learning a little bit about sharing, and that's one thing I really enjoy. Other cultures have learned how to share. Well, Nome has not always been a community over the centuries like some other places have. Nome is a result of the finding of resource gold at the time. I guess once upon a time, Nome as a community was 8-9 miles long along the beach. Today it's a community of 3,800 souls or so, but mining is still a big part of our community. Very few companies own the gold mines. We have a few people like Alex, who does the maintenance at our church during the summer when he's here, who comes up for mining. He says this is vacation, but he's really here looking for the gold as well, small pockets of here and there. He's down at the beach right now looking for color. But the impact is such that a few people have access through gold mining claims and don't allow anybody else to do that. That's the concept of we own this place, where those of us who grew up, the concept is everybody owns the land. Not, I don't own this, God made it, so how can I own it? And somebody else says, well, non-traditional people from here, I'll buy this land, I own it, nobody else can come here. So even hunting on that land, you have to kind of have a understanding with the owner that you can hunt there. And that's not always the case. So it's the ownership of the land, the mining, very few people. Most of the operators come from outside of Alaska or outside of our community. Very few people, native people, are involved in mining here. So it's for most of us, don't see much of a result from benefit for those of us who are here. The Methodist Church in Alaska has got a kind of a fun history to understand, or try to understand. Back in the 1800s, Alaska was divided up by a verbal comity agreement of which church was going to be the missionary to what part of Alaska. I understand that the missionaries for the Methodist Church were kind of the Johnny-come-latelys to that process. So they selected those areas in Alaska that had already been selected by, or had been evangelized, if you will, by the Russian Orthodox Church. Russian Orthodox have been here in Alaska since 1700s with the fur traders. And they brought with them the schools taught in the local language, churches, worship was done in the local language, and to have a missionary come saying, I'll bring the good news of Jesus Christ, but we'll do it in English, which people at the time did not understand, made it very difficult for the Methodists to be successful in converting people to Methodism. Where the Methodists did well with those communities like Nome, where we had a hospital, we had an orphanage like on Alaska. But on Alaska and Nome are still very much missionary outposts for the Methodist Church. When the hospital was here, I was reading some history of our church here in Nome. At one time we had over 260 members in this church. And I suspect most of those 260 were people who worked in the hospital. But we no longer run the hospital. A local native corporation, health corporation, runs the hospital. Our numbers are now down in the 40s. And it's not always a comfortable feeling when somebody says that, well, I no longer go to church because it's whatever. But it's a far cry from what it used to be way back when like I mentioned in worship yesterday, that I used to be able to ask what church you go to, not do you go to church. Those days are gone. Not being able to ask a person what church you go to and assume that they go to church, and know probably 80% of the time it's probably true. Where when we wonder, do people go to church at all? What impact is the church having? What is the mission of the Methodist Church? Our denominations that were here to make disciples for the transformation of the world. But if we do not understand what the world is to each individual, like in Nome, how can we help them transform their world for the betterment of all of us? It's difficult. Our denomination is mostly white. Excuse me for using that word, but mostly of dominant culture. And not having an understanding of what few souls are here in Nome and what their needs are. And having somebody from Arkansas, say, or Florida, want to send a package to Nome. And the clothing there is made for warm weather. And you send packages of inappropriate clothing items to Nome. What does that say? The people in Nome look at it and say, I can't wear that. It might look good fashionable on TV somewhere, but it's not our style. We need something warm. So a difference of culture, a difference of what people think we need is often difficult to convey. People just don't understand the differences, even in just the climate, of how much impact that can have.